Good evening, everybody. I am very delighted to see you all joining for this exciting event. I'm so glad to see so many of you joining us tonight on Zoom. We wish we could have been in person. I'm here at the Yale Quantum Institute on this very empty auditorium, but soon enough we'll have you over. So for those who don't know me, my name is Florian Karl. I am the manager of the Yale Quantum Institute and the curator of this series of non-technical talks co-sponsored by the Franke Program for Science and the Humanities. The goal of this event is to bring a new regard on quantum physics and science in general by having experts cast a new look on an often overlooked aspect of a scientific work. This is our 11th event, and this month marked the 4-year anniversary of this series that started in 2017. During this 4-year, we explored a variation of topics from music to quantum physics, math and crochet, space exploration and board games, biology and cloning. And tonight we have the chance to welcome the acclaimed author and poet Ben Okri for a special evening on quantum physics and fiction. Let me introduce the speaker for tonight. So Ben Okri was born in Minna, Nigeria. His childhood was divided between Nigeria, where he saw firsthand the consequences of war, and London. He won the Booker Prize in 1991 for The Famished Roads, and his novel, The Astonishing of God, was selected as BBC's 100 novel that shaped our world. His work has been translated into more than 25 languages, and he also writes plays and screenplay. He's a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature and has been awarded the prestigious Order of British Empire, as well as numerous international prizes and honorary doctorates. He's presenting his newest book, Prayer for the Living, which was released earlier this month in the US. I do have the UK version. The US version has the cover that you have behind me. It's a collection of short story that includes alternative realities for the living, alternative reality are true, which is going to read tonight. It's a strange investigation of a murder in London, and you'll see very quickly that it follows the strange pattern of quantum physics. So this event's going to be split in 2 parts. Ben will read the story and we'll have a slideshow that goes along with it. And then after the story, we'll have a Q&A. And without further ado, please welcome Ben, and feel free to start whenever you want.
Well, Florian, it's a real pleasure to be there and here. It's almost in itself a quantum situation that one is in 2 places at the same time. And tonight I'll be reading Alternative Realities Are True, which is set in London and various verses, or shall I say universes, multiverses. I must also add that it's a real pleasure that you're all here, and I thank you very much. Be great in the flesh, but you know, when all this is over, let's hope we can manage it. Alternative realities are true. It begins with a quotation. How wonderful that we have met with a paradox. Now we have some hope of making progress. Niels Bohr. He woke one morning into a strange universe. Everything in his 1-bedroom flat in Kensal Rise was exactly the same, but everything was also subtly different. He was not sure how. There was a message for him on the answering machine, which he listened to with the irritation the acute heat brought him. He hadn't been able to sleep. He had been puzzling over his latest case. With each new piece of information, he was finding it more troubling. The message was from the office, delivered in a verbal encryption which he simultaneously deciphered. The dead man had been seen in the cafe at the canal. He looked through the crack in his curtains. It was nearly dawn. In his garden, the blackbirds whistled their morning chorus. Usually, when he heard them, he knew that sleep was over for him. This morning, there was something different about their tone. Detective Draper got out of bed and slipped on his dressing gown and went to his study to review the case. On the face of it, the case was simple. There had been a murder near him in Council Rise, but the body of the victim had not been found. There was no actual proof of murder, but there was knowledge of it. A young, overwrought Muslim woman in a blue headdress, who gave her name as Anna, had come into the local police station. She had broken down and said a man she knew had been murdered. She gave his name. When asked how she knew he had been murdered, her eyes widened and she threw up her hands. She knew, she said. Who was the murdered man? Who was he to her? She was asked. But she would not say. Who was the killer? She was asked. At this, she panicked and fled from the station. A few inquiries led them to her address, and a watch was placed on the building. A man by the name of Barrett, the assistant of a famous artist, went missing that same day. He had been known to frequent the woman's flat. This was a month ago. Barrett had still not been found. Detective Draper, who believed more than anything that intuition was superior to intellectual deduction, opposing himself to the theatrical methods of Sherlock Holmes, which had so captivated the police force, Scotland Yard, and the general public, knew that he was dealing with a case that amounted to more than the appearance of the facts. He believed that it was indeed essential to study a case thoroughly, to acquaint oneself with the locale of the crime, to handle the items of the principal players. In short, to furnish the senses and instinct with all the available data and living facts possible. And then, like a fisherman who must commit himself to the sea, he must leave all those facts behind and trust to the mysterious dictates of intuition. He had developed the faculty of intuition as a young man when he trained himself to be able to tell on which side a coin would fall just by following the clearest whisper in his head. By slow degrees, applying this method to phone calls, knocks on doors, letters that he had received, guessing their contents and who had sent them before opening them for verification, he had come to develop this mysterious faculty to a formidable degree. Detective Draper never spoke about this to anybody, knowing full well he would be a laughingstock if he did. He mastered his secret technique behind a tremendous amount of paperwork and planning and detailed analysis. To all accounts, from the outside, he was an eminently practical detective who did his research and left nothing to chance. In truth, he believed in the fertility of chance itself, which he did not regard as chance at all. He believed that all things in the universe were linked and that every fact was related to every other. From his armchair, he solved his cases by indirection. He was the best in the force, his reputation unmatched. That morning in his study, he went over the case methodically. He realized that there was something wrong with the facts of the case, some slight alteration of the world. For example, as soon as they put a watch on the Muslim woman's house, certain other facts of the case shifted. This was puzzling. The watch reported that through the window, he had seen Anna's neighbor, a man named Yorg, cutting up a large chicken. The moment he noticed the chicken being cut up, the lights in Anna's room had come on. Here was where it became baffling. The watch swore that he saw Yorg both cutting up the chicken and going into Anna's room at the same time. The watch was a sober man of unimpeachable reputation. There were several other curious anomalies. Another, taken at random, was that when York was seen cutting up the large chicken in his room, the reported victim of the murder was seen by witnesses in a cafe on the canal a few miles down the road. Those who saw him said that he looked well, if a bit anxious, and that he was reading a book at the time. Most of the witnesses could not recall the title of the book. Detective Draper did not think this at all unusual. Most people, he found, did not notice what was right under their noses. The inattentiveness of people was a constant source of amusement to him. He had come to rely on their failure to notice things. His best deductions came from working round the bends of this failure. Questioning one of the witnesses, he was able, through indirection, to work out the title of the book. To any other detective, such a detail as the title of a book a victim was reading would be insignificant. But to Detective Draper, nothing in the universe was insignificant. The witness remembered, in fact, that the victim was reading a cat. What do you mean he was reading a cat? He was reading a cat. Did he have an actual cat in his hand? Both hands. What color was the cat? It did not have a color. Did it have a name? The last question had come to Detective Draper purely by intuition. It had simply dropped into his mind like that. But behind the intuition, hovering like the ghost of knowledge, was the understanding that some people see words as real things and that they are incapable of the abstract faculty of reading, transferring everything they read that has an image straight away into its physical equivalent. This was one of those anomalous facts that the detective stored away in his mind. Yes, it did have a name. What was it? It was a very strange name. Before you tell me what it was, tell me how you knew. It's strange, but I just did. I looked at the cat he was reading, and its name popped into my head just like that. There is no need to tell me the name of the cat, the detective said nonchalantly. Why not? I know it already, but thank you. The detective rose to signify the end of the interview, leaving the witness quite baffled. Detective Draper, absent-minded the moment he was consumed by a clue, called several bookshops. In a short time, he found out what he wanted to know. A copy of the book had been purchased that day, quite early in the morning, from any amount of books on Charing Cross Road. It was the only copy of the book purchased that morning. A check confirmed that the book had been bought by York, as the detective had suspected. Another call to the local police station confirmed something else, that the victim had not been seen since. As it stood, there were two sightings. One was of the suspected killer in two places at the same time. The other was of the victim after he had gone missing and was presumed dead. For the rest of the day, contradictory reports kept pouring in. A warrant for the arrest of York led to his detention. The large chicken he had been seen cutting up was brought in as evidence. But that same evening, York, who was in police custody, was seen in Anna's room. He was shouting at her and at one point called her a whore. I have killed that lover of yours, and there's nothing anyone can do about it, he said. What have you done to him? She cried. I have hidden him where no one will ever be able to find him. She was heard wailing, and York was seen departing from the room. The watch was unable to do anything because he had conclusive proof that the murder suspect was in police custody. He had no legal right to arrest the same person twice. Detective Draper considered the arrest of York to have been an act of sublime stupidity by the local police. The detective dropped in at the local station. The sergeant on duty, a thick-set man, was reading Maigret. His name was Pillock, and he had a reputation for brusqueness. The way I see it, detective, he said, is that we know a crime has been committed, but we have no evidence. We suspect it's a murder, but there is no body. And he could be a potential terrorist. We have to keep him locked up for the public good. The detective contemplated Sergeant Pillock. There was no use arguing with him. Explanation was equally futile. He would have to add the heavy-footedness of the sergeant into the equation. But do you see that the problem multiplies? Draper said. I see that it simplifies. Any new evidence? Only CCTV footage on a bus. What number? 6. Is that significant? Everything is significant, Draper said. What did the footage yield? Something puzzling. What? The suspect made several trips in one direction with black plastic bags. He appeared to be moving house. We never saw him get off. Anything else? Yes, but it doesn't make sense. Tell me. It stretches credibility. Let's have it. On one of the cameras, we caught an image of the bus just as it exploded. Did it explode? That's just it. It didn't. We believe the CCTV system has been hacked and false footage has been planted there. Unless there's an equally radical solution. But I fear we may be too late. We have to act fast. What shall we do? The detective did a rapid calculation. He felt himself encircled by time. The first thing he did was order that the watch be pulled off Anna's house. Then he suggested that the suspect be released and not followed. Not followed? No. But he must be followed. It will only make things worse. How? We are being invaded by one of many possible futures, Draper said. What was that? Nothing, forget it. Are you on something? No, I'm sober as a surgeon on duty. Well, then you need to fill me in. Detective Draper knew he could not explain the intuition that was filtering through to him. Wearily, he sought the most innocuous expression of it. He softened his voice as he spoke. Everything we do influences what the suspect does. We are multiplying the problem. Before, there was one murderer. Now, there are 3. 3? Which 3? Free, the detective corrected himself. I meant he should be free. 2. Detective Draper knew there were only 2 ways to resolve the case. One was to prevent the murder, the other was to uncover it. All the evidence suggested it was too late to prevent the murder. It had happened. The past had now been lost. If the victim had been apprehended when he was seen reading the cat, things might have been different. That moment was gone. It was lost because no one noticed that the past lurks in the present. Not just past events, but the past as present. Detective Draper liked to walk after he had been immersed in facts too long. When he had spent all day reading documents, studying evidence, listening to witnesses, when he was saturated with too much information, he would walk in a zigzag path through side streets to his home. Anyone seeing him would think he was wandering aimlessly. But his walks always followed the pattern of his thoughts. He had always known that the indirect route led more quickly to his destination. The direct routes were often bogged down in interruptions, conversations, and crowded streets. That evening, after a long spell at the station, he left late. His thoughts had gone off the map of indirection. He had taken so many side streets that he did not recognize where he was. He didn't mind. His best intuitions came while he was walking and while waking. Or rather, his best intuitions came while waking and while walking. In an odd way, he seemed to be doing both now. He seemed to be waking from the sleep of his thoughts. Where was he? He looked around. He had gone off the main road that led to his flat in Kensal Rise. The street where he now stood looked decidedly strange. He searched for the street name and found that he did not even recognize that. He walked on till he came to a barber shop. There were no customers. When he went in, he startled the barber who was reading a newspaper. "Can you please tell me where I am?" The barber stared at him with his mouth half open. "Is anything wrong?" "You came in here about 5 minutes ago," the barber said, "and you asked the very same question." Detective Draper looked round at the clock on the wall with its Roman numerals. It was 6:35 p.m. So I did, Detective Draper murmured, and he hurried out. He went back the way he had come. A glance told him that the barber had come out of his shop and was watching him. He walked faster, aware that the faster he walked, the faster walked all the events connected to him. If he sped up, things would speed up too. The web of connected events responded to his every deed. Suddenly, in his mind, he could see the lines that linked him to the victim and the murderer and the woman, except that these lines had multiplied in ways he could only guess at. He was walking aimlessly now, following the vectors of his thoughts. He conjectured that if he had arrived at this strange place by getting lost, then only by getting lost again could he return to a familiar world. He was thinking fast and walking fast, as if something unknown were stalking him. The linking lines moved faster in his mind. Then he suddenly stopped. In the middle of all that wandering, a clear thought, distilled and pristine, dropped into his mind. Why hadn't he thought of that before? There was now only one way to solve the murder. The past was close to him. There was only one path left. He had to arrive at a future place before the murderer did. He had to outwit him in all the vectors of time. At this point, the murderer had a time advantage over him. He had to overturn that advantage. He had to anticipate the murderer in the future. He walked home much more slowly. He noticed the council estates and the silver birches and the uneven pavement. It did not surprise him that he now knew where he was. He walked slowly and breathed evenly. As he turned into his street, someone brushed past him. The detective caught a confident smile on the face of the man who had jostled him. He was at his front gate when he realized that the smile belonged to the murder suspect. But when he turned to look, the man was gone. There was an envelope pinned to his front door. Inside the envelope was a message composed of letters cut out of newspapers and magazines. The message read, "All alternative realities are true." The detective let himself into his flat, shut the door behind him, and poured himself a glass of Argentinian Altamira. He sat down at a table near a window to contemplate the letter. After a while, he brought out a worn book of Escher drawings. Leaving the door in his mind open, he contemplated the drawings. but in the other rooms in his mind, he was thinking. In his research, he had discovered that the murder suspect had an unusual interest in a branch of speculative physics. In one room in his mind, he realized that the solution to the crime was not to be found in the real world, but in an unreal space, a speculative realm. In another room, he pondered the message he had received. All alternative realities are true. He contemplated the ramifications of the message while leafing through the drawings. Calmly, he began to chart out the clear lines of the case. Soon, he came to a dead end. He paused and put down the book. He knew that all dead ends are an illusion designed to bring motion to a halt. To those who can see beyond the illusion, dead ends are portals into unknown possibilities. He paid more attention to dead ends than to open highways. He knew now that a leap of faith was required. Then he remembered the cat that both men had. Then he remembered the cat that was both seen and not seen. He realized he was going to have to work backward. He went to sleep that night with the feeling that he had at least stopped the multiplication of the problem. Part 3. The next morning, an envelope was posted through his letterbox. Before he opened it, he knew that he would find letters cut out of newspapers and magazines composing an elusive message. The envelope contained a single sheet of white paper with the words, "The world is still here." He had a shower, got dressed, regarded his face in the mirror. The mirror had a slight warp that morning. He was not sure that the world was still there. Outside, the weather had changed. The sun shone intermittently through the dark masses of clouds. A cool wind with a deceptively icy core blew from the south. He went down the side streets towards the cafe where the victim, Barrett, had been seen reading a cat. The cafe was run by a long-haired Italian who combined obsequiousness with a mildly intrusive personal charm. Sitting in the same seat where the victim had been seen reading a cat, Detective Draper saw the canal beyond the balcony. There were boats moored on both sides. The detective drank his hot water slowly. He had given up drinking coffee years ago and now settled for the digestive refinements of hot water. Outside, birds were wheeling over the canal. While sipping, he had a singular thought. He knew that entertaining it would create realities that would only blur the case further, so he pushed the thought to a corner of his mind. He caught a taxi back to the office. To test his theory, he had his contact at the Evening Standard plant a report that the police were draining an obscure canal in Richmond in their search for the missing body. To lend this deception the veneer of plausibility, he had two amateur frogmen busily explore the canal. They were to pretend to pull something out of its shallow depths. What's the idea behind this flagrant waste of public funds on sham frogmen in a remote canal? Asked his superintendent, who had summoned him to lunch. You're aware that I have gone out on a limb for you too many times. And I have never let you down, have I? Detective Draper replied, calmly buttering his role. No, you haven't, I grant that, but there are many people after your job. They will use anything to get at you. God knows you have enough disadvantages as it is. Do I? Detective Draper said, while the glimmer of a new thought filtered through a door in his mind. You know you do. You're not an Oxbridge man. Neither are you. You are black? I wasn't going to say that, but you thought it. Look, we run the most colorblind department in the country. You took the words right out of my mouth. But I'm the only one that is, we have to face the realities of the world. Detective Draper suddenly stiffened. He held his head at an angle. A new thought had come through. Do we? He said, absent-mindedly. Yes, we do, replied the superintendent, puzzled by Draper's behavior. Have you had this conversation with me before? That's what I was getting to. About an hour ago? Yes. Why? We don't have any time. We have to stop it now. Stop what? There will be another murder unless we act fast. Murder? Of who? The woman. She'll be murdered and there'll be no evidence of it. Why not? Because she would have been murdered yesterday. Detective Draper stood up. You're not making sense, man, the superintendent exploded. Sit down and explain yourself. I really must dash, sir. I'll have a full explanation for you tomorrow afternoon if all goes well. But tomorrow is Sunday. But tomorrow is Saturday, the superintendent said to the departing figure of the detective. Yorkshire are playing Middlesex at the Oval. I know, Draper said before he disappeared through the door. And the score will be 17-1. What? Cried the superintendent. Detective Draper was already out on the street. Part 4. From the Kensal Rise police station, Detective Draper requisitioned 3 frogmen. Early on Saturday morning, he had them dive into the canal at Little Venice, right near the cafe. The area was cordoned off. The frogmen, in their dark wetsuits, began their mysterious exploration. There was a unit of police there with an unmistakable police van. Detective Draper watched from a distance. If his intuition was correct, in the next hour, a number of things would happen. Their precise order interested him. He knew he was in the realm of a speculative space now, where actually seeing what was sought made its existence real. The time, the opportunity were limited. Things were in mutant formation. Events were hovering between 2 realms, between being and non-being. From here on, the operation would be delicate. The frogmen in the obscure canal at Richmond found nothing, as was the intention. But the story planted in the Evening Standard had its desired effect, as far as a detective could tell. He kept looking at his watch. The frogmen here at the Little Venice Canal took turns in going in. One of them would stand on the edge of the canal and then flip over backwards. He would root around below for a while and then emerge. For an hour now, they had been exploring and had found nothing. The cricket game had begun at the Oval. The heat was beginning to rise. It was a bright day and people had begun to stop to watch the strange proceedings on the canal. This too had been factored into Detective Draper's complex calculation of events. Only by the frogmen diving, verifying, and bringing up could there be anything to dive for, verify, and bring up. The detective knew this. Something will be found only because something is looked for. The looking creates the finding. In just the same way, only the presence of onlookers created the event. The onlookers were essential. The detective had surmised that what was needed was a weighting of events, a weighing of events toward a more dense reality to counterbalance the ambiguous reality between worlds which had so far bedeviled the investigation. He intuited that all worlds had to come together here. That was why, even before he had full permission, He'd arranged for the frogmen to make a public exhibition of excavating the muddy depths of the canal. The ruse had worked. The item planted in the Evening Standard had caught the lively interest of Londoners, and soon everyone was talking about it. The crowd around the canal observing the frogmen grew in number. The trap sprung had yielded multi-dimensional fruit. An off-duty policeman had spotted the suspected murderer near the Little Venice Canal and had reported the matter to the local police station. The station chief had relayed the message to Detective Draper. With a nonchalant expression, he continued to observe the frogmen at work. Twice, the frogmen claimed to have found nothing. They had said it was just mud and rotten bicycles and broken paddles down there. The detective, with his keen awareness of the power of numbers, said, "Twice does not make anything conclusive. The canal conceals secrets which must be exposed. My career depends on it, maybe even my life." He sent the frogmen down a third time. He suggested that they look not so much in the deeper parts, but in the parts no one would think of looking. "What part is that, sir?" one of the frogmen said. "You will know when you find it." Disgruntled, they returned to work. They flipped over backward and disappeared beneath the muddied surface. Detective Draper, aware of the proximity of the murderer, knew that it was now a race against time. The frogmen had to find something before the murderer found him. He remained calm. He ordered a cup of hot water from the cafe. The cafe manager, the insouciant Italian, brought the water himself. His disheveled locks fell across his face. The Italian handed the detective the cup of hot water and held onto the pot. "So, what is going on, sir?" the cafe manager asked. Detective Draper turned to look at him. The Italian had the eyes of an insomniac. "It's best if you don't know. We don't want you entangled in the multiple webs of the problem." "I might be able to help." "How?" "I hear things. People tell me things." "I'm sure that's true. I'll contact you if your help is required." "Anytime," said the Italian. "It would be an honor to be of service." The cafe manager stood there watching the first frogman emerge from the murky canal. The detective turned to him with a furrowed brow, and the Italian immediately understood that his presence had become redundant. He filled the detective's cup and retreated into his cafe. Detective Draper felt the murderer moving closer, but he sipped his hot water with perfect calm. It's not the number of encounters in the numberless realms that count. It is the world in which the encounter is fixed, thought the detective grimly. A flurry among the frogmen told him that the nature of the game had shifted at last. He drank what was left of his hot water and went toward them. One of the frogmen had pulled out from the depths of the canal a black plastic bag. Dripping with muck, it was placed on the ground. The frogman hosed it down, and then the detective had it brought to the back of the van. A casual glance at its form told him what he needed to know. There was no need to expose the contents. The first stage of the duel had been fought. It might have been difficult to fix the reality of this black dustbin bag, but now that it was fixed, the rest was sure to be found. It was at that moment, perhaps delayed by the variable factors in the calculations of time, that a shadow moved into sight. York fired 2 shots. One pierced the metal of the white van, the other grazed Detective Draper's shoulder. Then York was wrestled to the ground by the plainclothes policeman who had been drinking cups of innocuous tea in the cafe. Before the detective fell, he was heard to cry out, "On no account are the frogmen to cease their exploration." He passed out for only a few moments. An act of will wrenched him back into consciousness. Detective Draper allowed the paramedics to bandage his shoulder while he surveyed the scene before him. The frogmen had persisted, and eventually they had dredged up 3 black bin liners from diverse parts of the canal. They were hosed down and kept in the back of the van that the bullet had pierced. The detective had no need to inspect their contents. He knew what they were. The afternoon sun played on the water of the canal, making its surface shine like gunmetal. The light came through the trees on both sides of the metal fences. Detective Draper could see the church through the leaves. He felt tired. He made a signal to one of the men. They bore him to a waiting car, but instead of being taken to the hospital for further treatment, he insisted on being taken home. Section 5. The next morning, with his arm in a sling, Detective Draper was at the police station. Out of respect for the part he had played in the investigation, he was allowed the first conference with the man who had shot him. They were in a soundproof room. The detective sat in a chair at the table, and the murderer sat opposite. "Something puzzles me," said Yog. There was nothing repentant about his expression. He stared at the detective intensely. "You want to know how I knew where to look?" Yog smiled. It was a thin smile, sustained by something resembling a twitch. Then he nodded faintly. "My question to you," said Draper, "is why?" "Why what?" They were still dueling. It was not over yet. There was still the chance of further multiplications. He had to be careful. "Why did you kill him?" "Are you sure it is why and not when?" "I know when." "You do?" "You're not going to trap me that easily again." "I have no idea what you mean." "Of course you do," said Draper. "All alternative realities are true." "I see," said York. "You got the clue." "It was designed to throw me off the scent." "You went against your own psychology," said York. "Like you, I have many psychologies," the detective said, leaning back. "But why did you kill him?" "He was after my woman." "She was not your woman. She told the police that you were just her neighbor and that you misunderstood her friendship." "She was a whore, and he deserved to die. He was not even one of us." "You killed him out of jealousy." "Not jealousy, revenge." The detective stood up. He felt weary. He was at the door when York fired the last question at him. "How did you know?" The detective at that moment felt a throb of pain in his shoulder. "The world is still here," he replied, and went out. Section 6. 3 hours later, he was sitting with the superintendent in the Scotland Yard canteen. They had window seats looking out over the river. "The facts don't make sense. Can you make sense of them for me so I can explain it to the board?" "I don't recommend an explanation." "What then?" "Leave them with the facts. Sometimes people need to be brought face to face with the incomprehensibility of the world." The superintendent stared at him. "Now you know why you will never make department head," he said. "It was never my ambition." "You have ambitions?" "I have ambitions that perhaps you won't understand," said the detective, sipping his hot water. "Besides, there are things better than ambition." "How can you stand to drink that tasteless stuff?" "It's not tasteless at all," Draper said. It restores me to the fundamental simplicity of the world." "The world seems to be anything but simple. Take this case, for example. What on earth was going on? It wouldn't make sense if I explained it. Try me. It was a multiverse murder. What on earth is that? Speak plain English, man. It was a murder that happened in many universes. You must be mad. In one universe, the murder hadn't happened yet. In another, it had. Each time we apprehended him, we multiplied. Okay, that's enough of that. If I hear any more, I might start to have crackpot ideas myself. Just tell me this, why the canal? I realized it when I learned the victim was seen in the cafe reading a cat. Reading a cat? The policeman who saw him was dyslexic. His condition was extreme. He saw virtually what he read. About 1% of dyslexics have this syndrome. What was the cat he was reading? It was a book. The book gave me the second clue. The rest unraveled itself. Out with it, man. You're tying me up in riddles. What was the book? Schrodinger's cat. Schrodinger's what? He had bought the book that morning and was seen reading it in the cafe after he had been murdered. Unless we are dealing with apparitions, there could be only one solution. The superintendent looked red-faced and exasperated. I had to somehow get all the universes in which the murder was multiplying to converge. I had to create what physicists called an event convergence. What on earth is that? Bellowed the superintendent, by now a swollen image of himself. It is the one event, the one thing that will fix time. In quantum mechanics, it is conjectured that the universe only comes into existence when we perceive it. I surmise that perhaps the body of the victim would only be found when we find it. The crime did not exist till the body was found. And the body was in the bin bags? Exactly. How did you know? One of the watchers outside the woman's house had seen the murder suspect cutting up a chicken. It was a chicken. It was a chicken because the watcher had seen a chicken. Do you mean to say yes? The superintendent paused for a long moment. But why was he trying to kill you? He wasn't really. We have to understand that this man was taking a cosmic gamble. He never really had any intention of killing anybody. He was overcome with rage, with jealousy, with a kind of love madness. In that state, it occurred to him that maybe if he killed a man in one universe, the man would still be alive in another. Somewhere along the line, he forgot what universe he was in. In short, he lost his reason. You mean he went mad? Depends on what you think madness is. Continue. In one of those universes, it occurred to him that if he could stop me before I could find the body, then he would never be caught, and the murder would, to all accounts, be forever speculative. Why wasn't I told all this at the time? You were at your cricket match, sir. A terrible game. We were mauled. Sorry to hear that, sir. Still, you could have sent a message. It was a delicate matter. What does that mean? I had to arrive at the body before the bullet arrived in me. There was a long pause. Detective Draper, you look terrible, the superintendent said. When was the last time you had some sun? Can't remember, sir. Get some sun. I want that shoulder working when you get back. Take a holiday, Detective Draper. Thank you, sir, the detective said with a wry smile. I think I might, while the world is still here.
That was a fantastic story. Thank you so much for taking the time to read it to us.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. Much more fun than I feared it would be.
We're having a bunch of people in the Q&A starting posing questions and things. But the first thing that I want to ask you is that there's very a few literary works about quantum physics. The one that comes in mind is the Michael Frey's play Copenhagen, that staged the discussion between Niels Bohr, which you used as an epigraph for your story, and Heisenberg and his wife Norland. But modern quantum physics is kind of a unique mix. Like, can you tell us a little bit why you choose quantum physics to stage this model, and how did it come together? Or like, what was your process?
Well, it's very hard to talk of process with a story like this. If I don't know if I should tell you how the story came about. It might actually spoil the wonderful mystery of it. Let's just say very simply that I was put in a position where I had to write a story, a detective story, and I've read so many detective stories, and I thought to myself, I really don't know how I can add anything to this really famous genre. And at the same time, for some time, in fact, for a long time, I've been having a very secret interest in quantum physics and quantum mechanics, and I've been reading around the edges of it for all sorts of reasons. Partly because of fascination with this field and this subject, because it's one of the few fields in science that, for the first time, actually begins to undermine the certainties that we have about reality. And also one of the fields in science that for the first time begins to hint at a kind of a spectral, unseen and fascinating dimension to existence and to the world as we think we know it. It's in fact, it's an area that really troubles the surface of our certainties. And I found that really, really, really magnetic. So I thought to myself, wouldn't it be wonderful if I brought a great secret love with a public problem? I have to write a detective story, and wouldn't it be great if I brought the two things together? So I conceived of the idea of Detective Draper, and that the case would, at the heart of the case, would be an issue concerning quantum physics, quantum mechanics, the uncertainty of the world, the way in which that which we look at changes by our looking, and the idea of superpositions and various things like that. And at the same time, I wanted to write the story in such a way that the story itself was symbolic of the quantum universe, or at least the way in which things act, as far as we know, on that level. And I was just fascinated by this abstruse, this obscure, this challenge, this difficult problem, and it was that more than anything. But also, I think the thing that fascinated me was the relationship between writing itself and the quantum world. I find there's a great resonance between the two things. So you have to understand, Florian, that as a child, one of the first things I wanted to be was a scientist. I wanted to be a physicist. If I'd known when I was a kid that there was such a thing as speculative physics, you wouldn't be talking to me now. I'll be where you are.
That's wonderful. It's interesting because I had the opposite things. I was doing theater before and then switched midway to become a scientist. So maybe that's what we are. We are just opposites. We switch at the same time. I have another question for you. You use real places to anchor your story. We talked about when I proposed you to read the story, you're like, oh, it would be great to have some way to like not have the audience just watch me read. And I was like, what can I do? And I started looking at maps of London, and I started to see that I could actually pinpoint all the details, like all the places that you mentioned in the book, the bookshop, the canal, the police station, all the streets are real and exist. And like, can you tell us why you picked like a real place? Is it because you were worried that if you have a weird location plus quantum physics, that would be too much for the reader? Or you were like, oh, this is the place that I like, that I know, and I can create something that's that can have multiple varieties on this?
All of the above, actually. Plus, the one of the great, I think one of the great secret laws of writing, which is that the real is underpinned by the unreal, and the unreal is supported by the real. These two things kind of work together invisibly, in just the same way that the quantum world and what we perceive of as the world of certainties operate at the same time. One is concealed, or as it were, exists deep inside the other. So one needs the reality. I find that to investigate on reality, you need reality to really look deeply into a problem. The more truthful the place is, the more real the place is, the easier it is for you to actually plunge into your exploration.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm going to start reading through the question that the audience is putting on the Q&A panel. We have a first question, which is maybe more a comment that I got from Michel Devoret, who's one of the quantum physicists that we have at YQI. He says, fantastic quantum story, and something is puzzling him. Is the story built around the picture of a frogman in the canal, or is it the opposite? And the reason why I'm putting this is because it's a funny comment that Michel is really well known that to name all of these quantum objects after animals. So we had, of course, the cats, but there's a snail happening. There's also some squids. And so I wouldn't be worried. I wouldn't be surprised that in the near future, one of the quantum devices had a frog somehow linked into this. Into this. So I will keep an eye on that, and I'll let you know. And maybe you should take some of the credit if we see a quantum computer with a frog system. But we have another question from somebody that you probably know, Priya Natarajan, who's the director of the Frankie program. And she said, I love the layers of reality that you explore in this story. Just curious, do you believe that narratives are stable, or are you playing with this notion as well?
Yeah, all wonderful questions. Again, narrative, like the relationship between reality and the quantum world. Narrative, while you're reading it, the arc of it, while you're immersed in it and reading the words and following the story, and the characters and the plot, appear stable. When you've finished reading it and you've left the text, the inherent instability narrative then begins to act on memory, mind, emotion, nostalgia, replay, and all of that. Then you go back to the text again, and then something strange happens. What was fixed and familiar and certain and definite undergoes occasionally wobbles and wrinkles. It changes. You finish it again with this new change, and then you go back and live your life, and then you come back to the text again, and the same thing has happened. So, is narrative stable? Is it unstable? It's very, very impossible to say. It's the same. This is what I'm trying to say. That the literature, that writing, shares something of the quantum universe. It really, really does. Because when you have it in front of you, you take a famous line that, like, to be or not to be, you have it in front of you. It is absolutely fixed, just like this chair or this table that I'm looking at. But you come back to it, you break it down, you look into it, you move away from it, you carry it around in your spirit, you come back to it another time, and something about it has shifted, something about it has altered. And I think narrative plays and works with our consciousness in the same way that the reality of reality works and warps and changes and shifts with our consciousness. I think the two things are linked. I didn't choose the quantum universe arbitrarily in the writing of this story. It's also meant to be a parallel of the way in which literature, the way in which words, letters, punctuation, these little quantum tools, as it were, work on the mind and on consciousness.
Thank you very much. Another question I have is that Prayer for the Living, your new book, is a very political book. Like oh yeah, you have the new version, even better. Here we go. I will put in the chat. So I think in the invitation from Zoom, you have the link. If you wish to buy the book, you should be able to do it through different online sellers. So feel free to grab a copy. All the stories are really wonderful, and we highly recommend this book. It's pretty good. And so in the story you just read, it seems to be the less subversive than, for example, if we can remember the first story, Boko Haram, about a suicide bomber child. And still in this murder mystery, which seems very apolitical, you explore some racial tension in the police department between the Detective Draper and the superintendent. And it's a very shocking thing, because there's been a lot of discussion about race and racial prejudices and systematic racism. And even this story, when the reader is focusing on the loops and like all the clues and all the details, you bring them back into reality and realize that even if in these alternate realities, you have the same flow and prejudices. I find it like an incredibly effective tool, like narrative tool, to like really bring back. Like, is it something that you thought in advance, like, oh, this is a way, or did you came more organically, saying like, because this is what usually happens in this kind of structure?
Yes, well, it came organically, because you know, I wanted you first of all to follow this detective purely from a point of view of a tradition. The tradition of detectives like Sherlock Holmes, like Lupin, that's suddenly become famous now because of the Netflix series. I want you to follow, first of all, enter into a genre identification with Detective Draper, and to enter this world, enter the exploration with him, just purely on that basis, on the pleasure of that tradition. But at some point, I wanted to pull the reader up short with the unstated reality. I'm fascinated by unstated realities in reading, because I think we're overwhelmed by stated realities, and after a point, we stop seeing them. We stop noticing the depth of certain problems, the depth of certain realities. We stop noticing them because we acquire kind of object blindness from too much familiarity and too much ease and too much superficial saturation, in a sense. And I wanted to drain the story of all of that, and for you to experience that fact, which was there all along, towards the end of the story, or in the middle of it, just to sprinkle it and then come back out. Because I think sometimes when you invert things, they're stronger. It's just a new way of dealing with one of the facts of a rich universe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a lovely, tough question.
Yeah, I know. We have some more question in the chat. Somebody said that I was curious about the reference to the bus explosion and the murderer potentially being a terrorist. Are there a socio-political intent in introducing these elements in light of the story being written through the eyes of a police officer trying to make sense of an ambiguous event unfolding in the London upper class?
Yes, absolutely. I wanted these political realities to be there within what seems to be a genre fiction that is complicated by quantum mechanics. I love the idea of having these realities. They're also in London, where I live. You know, near parts of Council Rise. There's been a lot of those kind of tensions there, and I mean the story has, to use a gardener's terms, healthy roots. The root is rooted in real things that have given a more mysterious expression. So I wanted to be true to a reality that I knew, even while writing this, what seems like a piece of genre fiction.
Thank you.
I like evaded realities. I like creating worlds where the real, where the realities of the world in which we're living in invades it and seeps into it, as well as doing the opposite, which is looking head on, as you said, with the Boko Haram stories. I like looking head on at things in a very steady, intense way, but I also like the indirect leaking in.
I have another question, more general about the book. It's a collection of short story that I know you've collected through all your career. Sorry, yeah.
I like it. I like it. We have to keep alternating.
It's an alternate realities. I have something. Also, speaking of alternate realities, I had a question because this in the lecture, the part 5 is missing. And so I was wondering if it was like, in my head, I was like, oh, maybe it's like a chapter somewhere that is hidden somewhere in the book. And I just realized when you read it, I had this like realization at the same time that Inspector Draper like was unraveling the mystery. I was like, oh, I'm unraveling the mystery of my copy. It's just so yeah, in this collection of series, how did you pick and arrange the order? And I know that short story I consider the hardest form of literature to write. For you, what was the advantage of using this format?
You mean the short story format or the way in which it was arranged?
Oh, I mean, yeah. But why did you pick to do a collection of short stories, and instead of maybe you could have expanded some of the other story that you had into like a full-fledged novel? Like, what is the advantage of having this format?
Oh, Florian, the whole point of the truth of a short story. A lot of writers tend to think that that the short story is really a frustrated short novel, or rather a stunted a novel, or a novel that just didn't get a chance to grow, hadn't had its vitamins and its protein. No, that's not the case. That's not the case at all. If a short story can be expanded to a novel, then it never was a short story in the first place. It's just that you didn't realize it. We have to remember that people like Joyce, Ulysses was meant to be the one of the last short stories in Dubliners, and it just grew, and it was never a short story. You can't expand a short story into a novel. That's the nature of the short story. It is completely. It has a complete integrity of its compactness, the complete integrity of its of the fact that it cannot be made more than it is. It's perfect and complete length, and it's not really about the length. It is about the tensions contained within it. It's about, actually, forgive the phrase, Florian, it really is about its quantum universe, the inner spaces, the core, the electrons, the things working inside it, the way they work and play with one another in a tremendously secret inner world dynamism. It's the short story is really a world. It's not a compressed world. It's a complete world. You might just it might appear that you've taken a slice of it, but the laws that make it are complete. And I love the short story form as for me, it's one of the best forms to explore certain thought experiments, certain questions, certain challenges, certain themes, certain obsessions. It's more than a laser. It's a laser. It's more than a laser, more than an X-ray. It's a new kind of a very high-powered super lens that looks really deep into the nature of a problem, and yet is able to distill it into this. I think it's a miraculous form, and that's why I've done so few of them, because they take such a long time to craft, and to, so that they have this extraordinary strange living tension.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Maybe we can take one last question, and then
Oh, be generous, Florian.
Oh, okay. We'll see. So you've heard Ben. If you have more questions, feel free to
yeah, take two or three more.
Will do. We have someone who's writing that. Thank you. I was fascinated by your work, and I am currently writing my bachelor dissertation on the Flemish Road and Unjaki's novel Transparent City. I am wondering if you know of the concept of Ubuntu, and if you think that that this, or commonly in general, is one of the steps that leads to a better world. Or do you think that urbanization, globalization, and capitalism have a negative impact on communities? At least the small one, such as the compound, and then obstruct potential growth and experiences?
Oh my goodness, that question is as far from the quantum universe as you could possibly get. But then at the same time, but then at the same time, it isn't, because it's. I mean, Ubuntu is in how the philosophy of a quantum universe affects and shapes a whole world. Yeah, I think Ubuntu is a very great African concept that can have very great, important consequences for the world. It's a philosophy that should be made more widely known. It's a philosophy of compassion, of community, of harmony. Yeah, I love the sound of it. And what was the question about globalization? Has it had an impact on communities?
Yes, on especially the smaller ones. If you want, you can also open the panel. It's a long question, and so you should be able to see it. It's the first one on the top.
Yeah, I'm not going to get drawn into that. That would be too complicated for me.
Sounds good.
to get into the whole, yeah. To give a very short answer, yes, globalization has had a negative impact on smaller communities. It's one of the difficult things to deal with. How to keep the richness of small communities within the impact of globalization. And yet, at the same time, globalization is one of the facts of our world. And I'm a great believer in not wishing away a fact. A fact is something we have to deal with, negotiate, fight, neutralize, work with, do something about. But we have to face them. It's what we writers do. We're not good at running away from facts. We look at them and give them an image. And the impact of globalization can be seen in quite a few of the stories in this collection.
Thank you. On that topic of African beliefs, we have another question of how do the African spiritual beliefs with the fluidity between the natural world and the spiritual realm influence the story, or do they?
I'm not sure that they do, except to the degree that maybe my mind is already, saturated with certain beliefs that I grew up with in Nigeria. There's not just a belief, but this sense that the boundaries between realms is more fluid than we think. Maybe that already predisposed me to be interested in the quantum universe, where the invasion, where suddenly reality is for the first time in a scientific context under great doubt and great scrutiny, great uncertainty. The other thing I want to add, quite separate from that, Florian, about my fascination with quantum mechanics is the place of consciousness in all of this. And of course, this is something that quantum physicists are not. I don't know how you deal with it. You deal with the external aspect of the effect of measurement, the effect of measurement on or the effect of looking, of witnessing, of observing on the actual process, the split experiments, for example. But I am fascinated in what it is about consciousness, about the fact of the consciousness of the observer that actually gives rise to this effect, that actually gives rise to the fixing of these subparticles into either a wave or a particle. I'm fascinated by this side of the quantum equation, us, and our consciousness, and how what is going on here that affects what's going on, if you can say, there. And is this? Can I ask you? Is this something that is dealt with at all within the Quantum Institute? Is this something you guys look at?
So it's something like the observer effect is something that, of course, is really well known here, and then that they try to fight. But I don't think there's a more there's a more philosophical research of that, like in the world, because in the day-to-day life of a researcher, they perform experiments, and the way they deal with this observer effect is that they use side techniques to like measure indirectly the measurements and perform calculation in an indirect way to avoid to perturb the result and the inside of the experiments. And so I don't think people are really thinking about how themselves affect the result. I think they more are looking for ways to prevent that from happening and obtaining the right answer. However, that's something that the Yale Quantum Institute has been trying to investigate by hiring artists in residence. We had a few people coming in and trying to think about these topics, and that's something that I don't think researchers who are trying to build quantum computer currently have time to think about it. There's a huge race in the US and the world to build the first quantum computers, and I think it's gonna be another pan of research or of maybe having people from the humanities and philosophy trying to think about these topics, and I think bringing in artists that might be able to use different technique or different medium to sort of open a reflection is something that we've done. For example, in the space that's in front of me, we used to have a big quantum computer. Like it was an art piece done by Martha Lewis that had cameras and sensor. And when the visitor will go inside this installation, the visitor was perturbing the calculation that was done with lights and sensor. And so it was interesting to see that the art piece was working perfectly, performing a very simple quantum computation, but it was working without anybody in it. And as soon as a visitor entered the space, the camera will pick it up and then will sort of like disturb the calculation, and you couldn't really do the calculation anymore. And so there was a way to see how ourselves are like disturbing the quantum world in a sense. So of course everything was not quantum because there was at the human scale, and it was doing in classical computers. But we were trying to start to create this tiny idea in people's head to start thinking about these topics.
Interesting. We have to have more of these conversations. I think science needs to take an interest. We need to be, at some point in the future, we're going to have to deal with the science of consciousness. At some point, it may be in 1,000 years' time, but we're going to have to deal with it. And if it's a shorter time frame than that, maybe there would be a good excuse to have you come to the YQI. But if it's 1,000 years, well, we'll have to wait on that. I might still be around. Who knows? Decompose time, slow time down. That's fair. And any other questions before I go? Let me have a quick look.
in the chat. Yes, we have one last question, which is on the topic of short story. Who do you admire as master of the art form, past or present? Is there any modern day practitioner that excites you on this? So it's a more general on the theme of short story.
Oh my goodness.
I guess love what they want is like maybe some recommendation, some good read recommendation on short story.
Yeah, I'm very old fashioned in I mean, I read a lot of new short stories, but I go back to the old ones for the reasons I mentioned earlier, because the thing about a great short story, the thing about a great novel, the thing about a great poem, a great piece of writing, is that it multiplies its realities. It really does. It's not only is it not the same every time you read it, it gets incredibly richer. It gets immeasurably richer. And I think we bring that constant richness to it. But in order for that to happen, there is one condition for that to happen, which is that the piece itself has to have had to have begun, first of all, with a condition of a very high level of achievement, of accomplishment, of compression, of truth, of integrity, call it greatness, call it whatever you want. It has to have had that first, and then that has to have interacted and moved and played and danced and be shaped in time itself and consciousness and many readers. And so a text is enriched by the vast number of secret readings brought to it or to them. And so I tend to go back to the reading enriched texts that have played and worked and dreamt through time. So I love some of the Cervantes short stories. And here's another very interesting one, Don Quixote, a book that's almost 1,000 pages long. It began as a short story. That tells you something about the way in which the short can contain the vast, and the vast can contain the small. Chekhov, I keep going back to. There are many wonderful modern masters, and many of them can be read in the pages of the New Yorker magazines and anthologies around the world. There are many young and excellent African writers. It's not hard to find really good short stories, but if you want a deep travel and a deep journey, well, go to the ones that have acquired their presence in time. Go to people like Chekhov, yes, Maupassant, yeah.
Thank you so much, Ben. Maybe we can conclude on that by doing some entanglement experiments where I can show the UK version of your book and you can show us the US version of your book. Yes, the link to buy the book is somewhere in the chat. You should be able to find it. Thank you so much for the time that you have to read this wonderful short story. Thank you for answering all your questions, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you all very much. It's been a real pleasure. I hope we meet in the flesh someday, and look after yourself.
That would be a great pleasure. Thank you very much, Ben. Have a good night.
Florian, thank you. Hope we meet soon. Take care.